Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome to another Sunday stream. Doing things a little differently. I'm getting the feeling you guys don't really like the whole Slow Dance Sunday thing, which I get it. I'm not a very good reader. So I figured we'd try something a little bit different this time, and I'm just experimenting right now, and I'm about to go on vacation, so I disabled democracy for now. But I figured, you know what, we've been covering so many different comic book artists, how about we, this stream, cover a comic book writer? And I have elected to do the first. I've chosen the first one for this new series, and that is Mr. Garth Ennis. Now, but quick thing before I really get started, my internet has been a little spotty on my end, so if things shut off on your end, please let me know in the chat, or if I ended up pausing, just let me know. And a reminder, I do not own any of the media that we're going to be going through today. So, let's get started. So, Mr. Garth Ennis. A lot of you already know who this guy is. If you're a normie, you know this guy as being the one behind The Boys. And by behind The Boys, I mean he wrote the original comic book, The Boys. He wrote the original series. And he also worked on The Punisher, and back in the 90s, he came out with a very popular Vertigo comic called Preacher, which also got its own TV series. Though, I've read some of the Preacher series, and I haven't watched the Preacher TV show, but from what I understand, they took some serious liberties with the Preacher TV show, and I'm just scratching my head like, what? It's like, I haven't even finished this series, and I am already seeing serious problems with what they're trying to accomplish here. But, anyway, let's get into this. So, as usual, when we're covering a creator, we're just going to go ahead and start with the Wikipedia page. Right, so Mr. Garth Ennis, born January 1970, is a Northern Irish. Oh. So we'll get into that later, but you guys will figure out why I went ooh there. American comic book writer, best known for the Vertigo series Preacher with artist Steve Dillon, his 9-year run on Marvel Comics' Punisher franchise, and The Boys with artist Derek Robertson. He has collaborated with artists such as Dillon and Glenn Fabry on Preacher, John McCrae on Hitman, Mark Silvestri on The Darkness, and Carlos Esquerra on both Preacher and Hitman. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that last name. His work has won him recognition in the comics industry, including nominations for the Comic Book Buyer's Guide Award for Favorite Writer in 1997, 1998, 1999, and 2000s. Like his inspiration Alan Moore, he is a promoter of left liberal ideas. Oh. We're actually getting into his political alignment here. Okay. For which he has received numerous awards and recognitions from specialized British and American publications and organizations such as the U.S. Comic Art Award and the Comics Buyers Fan Guide Fan Awards. Ugh. Yeah, if you read any of Garth Ennis's works, you will know that he is very left-leaning. Even way back in the 90s, he was very left-leaning. Alright, so yeah, born... so he is 55 years old now. Notable works equal are... My cats are waiting around the frickin' cat feeder. Notable works, Preacher, The Boys, Hellblazer, Punisher, and Hitman. Awards, National Comics Awards for Best Writer, UK Comics Award for Best Writer, and the Eisner Award for Best Writer in 1998. Alright. So Ennis is originally from Northern Ireland. So remember when I went ooh earlier? That's because he was born pretty much smack dab in the middle of the Troubles in Ireland, which is like, oh, yeah. Did I mention that Garth Ennis is an atheist? So, yeah, he doesn't have very fond feelings about religion in general. All right, raised with no religion, Ennis's first exposure to the idea of God was as a 6-year-old in primary school. Ennis's teacher told the class that God was a being who could be seen inside their hearts, was always around them, and would ultimately reward or punish them. Ennis described the idea as bewildering, strange, and terrifying. He later used his experience in his comic book series Preacher, whose protagonist is slapped after telling his grandmother that he finds the concept of God scary. Although the fictional violence in that story was not reflected in Ennis's real-life upbringing, oh my god, if it was, I mean, I'm glad it didn't happen to him, but if it did happen to him, that definitely would explain a few things. Alright. His classmates later reassured each other that they all loved God, though Ennis said, "I think I hate him." Ennis later asked his mother about God, and when she asked him what he thought about the idea, Ennis responded, "It sounds kind of stupid," a statement the adult Ennis clarified was meant to mask his fear. His mother's response was, "Well, there you are then." So, outside of the whole Troubles thing, when I was over in Ireland studying abroad, I've had like 2 different Irish gentlemen just flat out tell me they were atheists, which was wild to me because that's something that just does not happen. Well, at least back at the time, it did not happen as much in the United States, where if you were open about it, you just had to have that I don't give a fuck attitude. But if you admitted it to a random crowd, you're always going to get one person who will try to argue with you about God. At least that's my experience. So, but the Irish, despite everything, are actually quite frank about religion and atheism, and it's quite interesting. Alright, so in 1987, Ennis befriended artist John McCrea while shopping at the first comic book specialty shop in Belfast. Oh yeah, Belfast. Which had been opened by McCrea and another friend. Ennis would later ask McCrea to illustrate his first professional comics project. It was here that Ennis first met comics writer Alan Moore, who advised him to focus on creator-owned work rather than letting comic companies take ownership of his intellectual property. Which I believe is a very good idea, because yes, the big 2, while they have produced some good works that people enjoy to this day, they have a history of screwing over people. But yeah, Belfast. When I was over in Ireland, when I was over in Europe, I never really had a sense of like someone's going to shank me until I got up into Belfast. Even though the Troubles were very much over by the time I was there, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. And at one point, we were standing on one side of the road to look at a mural that was painted during that time. And while the tour guide was explaining to us the importance of the mural, this one Irish dude came out of like a shop with like a pack of beer. And he saw us and he screamed at our tour guide, "Tell them what really happened." Like, it's very clear that no one in that city was happy with the arrangement that they've got going on up there. Alright, so now we get into his career. Alright, Ennis began his comic book writing career on his 19th birthday in 1989 with the series Troubled Souls in the British anthology Crisis. Illustrated by Ennis's friend John McCrea, as living in Northern Ireland meant he did not require reference material for the Belfast-based series. It tells the story of a young apolitical Protestant man caught up by fate in the violence of the Irish Troubles. Blech. It spawned a sequel, For a Few Troubles More, a broad comedy featuring 2 supporting characters from Troubled Souls, Dougie and Ivor. In 1997, American publisher Caliber released Dicks. I have seen a couple of those issues in shops over here. Serving as another Dougie and Ivor adventure. Several follow-ups featuring these characters are subsequently published by Avatar Press. Oh yeah, Avatar is a really big, like, indie company. I don't know if they're still around. Are they? Yeah, it looks like they're still around. But quite a few of the, I call them the Vertigo alumni, because they were some of the British guys brought over for the British invasion. And they settled in Vertigo, but then they have since left. But most of them have, flittered over to Avatar Press. Even Alan Moore has published a few things in Avatar Press. I think Providence was one of those books that was Avatar. Was it? Okay, Alan Moore Providence. That was... That was Avatar Press, right? Yeah, that was Avatar. Alright. We're not talking about Alan Moore, though, there. Okie dokie. In explaining why he chose to write Troubled Souls as his debut comics work, Ennis explained, "It was the kind of thing that was doing well at the time. I ought to be completely clear and say that, with hindsight, that Troubled Souls really represented Troubled Soul really represented was naked ambition. It was a direct attempt to get published, and it was the road that seemed most likely to lead me to success." Another series for Crisis was True Faith, a religious satire inspired by his school days drawn by Warren Pleece. A collection edition was issued in 1990, but a series of complaints from churches and religious groups led to it quickly be withdrawn from sales. Oh, I bet they were not happy about Preacher. It was republished in 1997 by the US DC Comics imprint Vertigo. The plot follows an atheist teenager attending Christian school. After publicly insulting his classmates' religion to get back at a girl he was interested in who did not return his romantic feelings, the boy attracts the attention of a Maltheist and is coerced into helping him murder clergy and bomb churches. Okay, I can see why that was banned. Following the death of the Maltheist, the book ends with the atheistic hero willingly carrying out a shooting at his Christian school. Yeah, I can definitely see why that would ruffle some feathers. It's like, dude, you just got rejected by a girl. Like, really? Is getting rejected really worth shooting up your school? Really? In the introduction to the Vertigo edition, Ennis described this as a wish fulfillment. Oh, jeez. Shortly after, Ennis began to write for the UK comic series 2000 AD and later wrote stories for the title's flagship character, Judge Dredd, taking over from creator John Wagner for several years. Ennis's Dredd stories included Mascara Killer, a satirical attack on mainstream pop music, Emerald Isle, a tongue-in-cheek story set in Ennis's native Ireland, and the 20-part Judgment Day. Ennis also contributed the story Time Flies with artist Philip Bond, dealing with time travel paradoxes and Nazis, of course. In 2001, following much work in the United States, Ennis briefly returned to UK Comics to write the Judge Dredd story Helter Skelter. Ennis said afterwards that there was not a hope to his returning to writing Dredd, as he was generally not happy with his run. "I'm too close to Dredd. I like him too much. I can't tamper with the formula, nor can I take the piss in any way I do with superheroes." Aww. He doesn't want to hurt his favorite character. That's so cute of him. Despite the fact that you're basically... You wrote Crossed, so... This is... I have very mixed feelings about this. It's like, that's adorable, but also, holy shit, you were the one who wrote Crossed and The Boys. Okie dokie. So, now we get into DC Comics. In 1991, Ennis took over the horror series Hellblazer from DC Comics' Vertigo imprint. He wrote the series through 1994, with Steve Dillon becoming the regular artist during the second half of Ennis's run. Ennis and Dillon would later become regular collaborators on other comics, including the one-shot Heartland, exploring one of Hellblazer's secondary characters. Years afterward, Ennis briefly returned to Hellblazer for the 5-part Son of Man story with artist John Higgins. I wonder if he and Steve Dillon were buddies. Okay. Ennis and Dillon went on to create the 66-issue Vertigo series Preacher. Running from 1995 to 2000, Preacher has been cited as Ennis's landmark work. Its plot concerns a preacher with supernatural powers who literally searches for the Christian God who has abandoned his creation. Mixing influences of Western and horror films with twisted humor and religious satire, it drew plots for Ennis from all sections of the media. The Guardian newspaper voted one of the Preacher collections its book of the week, and film director Kevin Smith described it as more fun than going to the movies. The AMC television series Preacher, adapted from the comic book, premiered in 2006. Yeah, and as I said earlier, a lot of fans of the Preacher series have mixed feelings about that show. Alright, from 1993 to 1995, Ennis worked with artist John McCrea on another DC title, The Demon, during which the duo introduced superpowered contract killer Tommy McGoffin, a character Ennis and McCrea would go on to use in the character's own title, Hitman. Woohoo! With the exception of a reverent depiction of Superman, Ennis's writing on Hitman was known for portraying superheroes as ridiculous. Oh yeah, Ennis has gone on the record to say that he really actually likes Superman. Like, he likes Superman a lot, and which is very funny considering, again, he created Homelander, who is supposed to be a parody of Superman. Well, parody / satire, such whatever you want to call him. Okie dokie, where were we? And characteristically commonly found in Ennis's material involving such characters. Hitman ran 60 issues from 1996 to 2001. Ennis also penned several Hitman specials and spin-offs. Following the main title's cancellation, Ennis and McCrea returned to the world of Hitman for a Justice League crossover, and later a comedic mini-series following the supporting characters from Hitman entitled Section 8. Alright, other DC Comics projects Ennis wrote include Bloody Mary for the Helix imprint. That was the imprint where Transmetropolitan was also published in before it came to Vertigo. Run on the Authority for the Wildstorm imprint, and the first arc of the Authority spin-off series Midnighter, as well as a story from the series Unknown Soldier. Oh, I have that book. It is actually very good. And the original creations Goddess and Pride and Joy. Goddess is and Pride and Joy is also They're out of his wheelhouse, and Ennis is one of those writers where once he's in his wheelhouse, he is fantastic. But once he's out of his wheelhouse, that's when things get a little wonky. Alright, all for the Vertigo imprint. Alright, Marvel Comics. Woohoo! Ennis's first work for Marvel was Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe in 1995. Ennis noted that he quit writing for Marvel after completing this work, as the dialogue in the comic had been altered without his consultation. Yeah, that's what we were saying earlier. The big two, they're more than willing to fuck with you when they want. Following the end of Hitman, Ennis was once again offered the chance to write The Punisher at Marvel. The initial 12-issue miniseries was illustrated by Steve Dillon, who also illustrated much of Ennis's subsequent 37-issue run on the Marvel Knights Punisher series. No longer finding violence comedic in the light of the September 11th terror attacks, Ennis relaunched The Punisher under Marvel's Max imprint, allowing for darker stories. His 60-issue run was released concurrently with several Ennis-penned Punisher miniseries such as Born and Barracuda, and the one-shot The End, The Cell, and The Tiger. Creators of Punisher Warzone have declared Ennis's Punisher Max run to have been one of the major influences on the film, and Ennis and Dillon reunited for a Punisher Warzone miniseries to tie in with the film. Oh yeah, the 2008 movie. Yeah, because I recently finished the Welcome Back Frank series, and if you read Welcome Back Frank compared to the other Punisher books that he's done, Welcome Back Frank is a lot more comedic and a lot more goofy and whimsical, but that was published like within 2000, the year 2000. This was like right before the 9/11 attack. So I guess I can see that, where after the terror attacks it would be seen as gauche. And maybe because of the terror attacks that kind of sort of had a religious bent touched a nerve in Ennis. Like, and especially because the 9/11 attacks were way bigger than anything in the Troubles. I'm not trying to minimize the Troubles, but taking down 2 giant skyscrapers, that is a lot bigger than a car bomb. And again, not downplaying any violence, but that would definitely, like, touch a nerve there. Alright, in 2008, Ennis ended his 5-year run on the Max Imprint's Punisher series to write the Marvel miniseries War is Hell, The First Flight of the Phantom Eagle. Illustrated by Howard Chaykin. Oh, I think I know this one. It featured the little-used character Phantom Eagle, a World War I pilot. Other series Ennis wrote for Marvel included Where Monsters Dwell, Spider-Man, Ghost Rider, Hulk, Thor, and a series of Goran Pavlov's illustrated Nick Fury stories under the Max imprint. These stories stripped Superfly Fury of his science fiction trappings in favor of military and CIA situations, including a focus on the first Indochina War in one storyline. Alright, getting to the independent publishers and creator-owned works. Ennis has written a 2008 Dan Dare miniseries published by Virgin Comics, and the origin stories for The Darkness for Image Comics and Shadow Man for Valiant Comics. Original comics Ennis has created include the 5-issue miniseries Seven Brothers for Virgin Comics, on which Ennis collaborated with film director John Woo, a vulgar superhero satire entitled The Pro, oh, I've heard of that one too, for Image Comics, the post-apocalyptic Just a Pilgrim for Black Bull Press, and War Stories for DC and later Avatar Press. Avatar has published the bulk of Ennis's creator-owned material, which includes the post-9/11 War Story 303. I have that one. A western entitled Streets of Glory, the extreme horror comic crossed... Is it even extreme horror at that point? I'm pretty sure crossed... It's gore porn. It's basically like gore porn. Back to Brooklyn, a crime limited series co-written with Jimmy Palmiotti for Image Comics. Caliban, a science fiction horror series inspired by the movie Prometheus. And Chronicles of Wormwood. Oh, I've read that one too. Which dealt with the friendship between an African-American Jesus Christ and a benign Antichrist. In 2011, Avatar commissioned Ennis to write and direct a original short film, Stitched, produced to drum up support for a possible feature. Ennis was also the initial writer for the Stitched comic book tie-in, also published by Avatar. Alright. Ennis has also done both creator-owned and commissioned work for Dynamite Entertainment, most notably The Boys. Mainly illustrated by co-creator Derek Robertson, who Ennis previously worked with on the Marvel series Fury Peacemaker and Punisher Born. The Boys ran for 72 issues before concluding in 2012. This creator-owned extended series was a superhero satire, bringing the genre to places far darker than Ennis had before, not only portraying superheroes as ridiculous, but also amoral, malevolent, and deviant. Announced in 2006, the originally published by DC's Wildstorm imprint, The Boys was initially canceled after 6 issues. I can kind of see why. Ennis later explained that this was because DC Comics were uneasy with an anti-superhero tone of the work. The series was subsequently picked up by Dynamite. The series was successful and spawned spin-offs. No, Siri, no. I said series, and apparently my phone thought I was saying Siri, but I was not. Bad phone. Alright. Picked up by Dynamite. It was successful and spawned spin-offs, including a mini-series focused on the villain protagonist, Billy Butcher. In 2019, The Boys was adapted into a TV series by Amazon. Other original works for Dynamite include the Howard Chaykin illustrated crime comic Red Team, and a meta-series of war comics called Battlefields, made up of miniseries including Night Witches, Dear Billy, and Tankies. Among his commissioned material, Ennis wrote the pulp character The Shadow for Dynamite. I remember that being mentioned in a Shadow video. In a surprise move, Ennis attempted to crowdfund a children's book? What? What? That's a left turn I didn't expect. What the hell? Who the hell would ever want Ennis to write a children's book? What would he even write a children's book about? This is the guy who... A constant theme in his books are dick mutilation jokes. It is very specifically dick mutilation jokes. Why would you put that guy in charge of a children's book? Okay. Alright, unable to secure a children's book publisher due to its violent... in which the main character is eaten by a monster. What the hell? Earth, as the book became known, was ultimately published by Dynamite. What? Okay. Okay, I gotta see this. Earth. Garth Ennis. Okay, so we have an Amazon listing. Earth. Oh, you look so cute. Alright, so he is... Let's see, get some images. No. We need Earth. Aw, Earth! He's so cute. Got all sorts of little blobule creatures. This is adorable. Though it's a little strange that he wanted to make a children's book. I mean, I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I think I'm a little bit more qualified to make a children's book than him. Alright, I'm gonna set something on fire real quick. Alright. So Earth was published. Ennis wrote Sarah in October 2018 for TKO Studios, a war story following a team of female Russian snipers as they beat back the Nazi invaders during a brutal winter campaign on the World War II Eastern Front. Ennis wrote String Bags in 2020 for the U.S. Naval Institute. The graphic novel relates the adventures of Allied airmen who crewed a swordfish airplane during World War II. Neat. Alright, influences and views on comics. Ennis has explained that as an avid reader of British war comics during his formative years, he did not read superhero comics until his late teens, at which point he found them ridiculous, although he frequently cites mid-80s superhero material among his influences. For instance, Ennis noted that the first American comic book he read in its entirety and appreciated was The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, an author who would prove influential on Ennis's subsequent work, with Ennis citing Miller's portrayal of Nick Fury in Elektra Assassin as his model for writing the character. Okay, we're gonna watch a video after I get through this because I'm starting to get cotton mouth real quick. Alright, Ennis said he was blown away by Miller as The Dark Knight Returns was the first time he encountered a comic writer who approached his work like a novelist. While Ennis is already interested in a creative profession, Frank Miller's material and other mid-80s mature readers' comics like Swamp Thing and Love and Rockets inspired him to look into specifically writing comics as a career. Alright, despite being... that is a giant-ass paragraph. Despite being influenced by superhero material and having written a number of superhero stories both for and outside Marvel and DC, Ennis is noted for subverting the genre and mocking the characters in this work. For example, in the 1995 one-shot special Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe, Ennis has the Punisher kill every single superhero and supervillain on Earth. As a World War II aficionado, Ennis also said he finds characters like Captain America borderline offensive because, to me, in the reality of World War II, was very human people, ordinary flesh and blood guys who slogged it out in miserable, flooded foxholes. So adding some fantasy superhero narrative, that has always annoyed me a little bit. Well, Ennis, I do have to disagree with you there. I understand your feelings for it, however, Captain America was trying to inspire people because at the time, a lot of Americans did not want to go to war against Nazi Germany. Not necessarily because they were pro-Nazi, although there was a subsection of Americans who were pro-Nazi, but because they didn't want to get engaged with another foreign war. And it took creators like Jack Kirby and... why am I blanking on the writer right now? But creators like Jack Kirby, who, by the way, was a Jew, coming up with Captain America to try and inspire the American people to get involved in the war and put down the Nazi threat before it became even bigger. Yes, World War II was a lot more gory than the Captain America stories would lead you to believe, but look, you gotta hype people up when it comes to a big threat like that. It sounds horrible to say, and I understand it sounds absolutely horrible, but when it's like, what's your alternative then? That we completely just portray the ugliness of war as it is and terrify the children of war, having them shriek, or children or young adults who could be drafted into war, having them shrink away or try to dodge the draft and possibly allow the Nazis to win? Like, hate it all you want, but we needed to hype people up to get ready to defeat Hitler. Hate it all you want, but Hitler had to go. And if we had to get someone dressed in a red, white, and blue suit to inspire them to punch a Nazi, then you kind of had to do it back then. I'm sorry. People need a little bit of fantasy to help them get through the horrors of life. That's a controversial take, and I know I'm going to piss a lot of people off with that. Alright. Nonetheless, Ennis has admitted to having appreciation for the idea behind Wonder Woman, if not the character, and even to outright liking Superman, the latter of whom he was noted for writing respectfully in Hitman. Ennis has since explained that his issue with superhero comics is not over the genre in and of itself, but more of its dominance in the comic book industry and the constraints imposed on superhero stories by publishers. I find most superhero stories completely meaningless, Ennis said, which is not to say I don't think there's potential for the genre. Alan Moore and Warren Ellis have both done interesting work with the notion of what it might be like to be and think beyond human, see Miracle Man, Watchman, and Supergod, but so long as the industry is geared towards fulfilling audience demand, i.e. for the same bright-colored characters doing the same thing forever, you're never going to see any real growth. The stories can't end, so they'll never mean anything. I mean, I can kind of see his point there. And I have had my gripes in the past with the whole, oh, Batman has been around all this time and every single thing that has happened in Batman's life is canon to his character, and he's still youthful, he's still able to fight crime, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, this dude literally had his back broken in half at one point. I don't care what kind of realism logic, any kind of logic you want to put, but in the real world, a back injury like that puts you out of commission for at least a decade. Like, I'm sorry, like, how do you survive something like that and not suffer serious consequences? Alright. Ennis has remarked that in terms of Marvel and DC characters, he prefers the ones he described as more grounded, such as the Punisher, John Constantine, and Nick Fury. In particular, Ennis describes the Punisher as resembling the British comics character he loved as a child more than Marvel and DC superheroes, which provided him with a way to the character. Though his Constantine stories, such as Dangerous Habits, were widely acclaimed, Ennis grew to dislike the character. He told Vulture in 2014 that he had come to find Constantine morally repulsive and had no desire to write a character who essentially gets his pals killed and then explains that they were doomed anyway, so why not just spend their lives and use them up? Yeah. I mean, John Constantine was morally gray from the get-go. Like, he debuted in Swamp Thing, and he was morally gray even then. Like, he was trying to pull cheap tricks with Swamp Thing and other magic users even in that series. So he was never really a heroic character. He was always a morally gray character. And while yes, he does do everything he does for the greater good, or to at least minimize the damage that some magic shenanigans are going to cause, that doesn't take away from the fact that he himself has done some incredibly amoral things. Oh good, they expanded the personal life thing. So way back in, I think it was 2019 or something like that, I was trying to write an article for The Unknown Soldier, and I decided to just, look up some fun facts about Garth Ennis, and the personal life segment was literally a sentence that said, Garth Ennis identifies as an atheist, and that was it. It's like, really? You're not gonna tell us anything more about this guy? But, okay, so it looks like they have expanded upon his biography to at least a paragraph ever since then. Alright, so, Ennis has become a citizen of the United States by July 2016. Ennis is an atheist and said he feels disdain towards religion. Ennis blamed growing up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles for influencing this attitude. While he was not directly involved in the conflict as a child, Ennis would hear about it each morning on the radio. Ennis has related that having been raised secular, religiously motivated violence made no sense as to him, characterizing such conflict as a disagreement among participants over how to worship their imaginary friend, that more than anything gave me my distrust of religion. Ennis has maintained an interest in military history since childhood, inspired by the war comics from his youth, and Ennis is married. We don't know who he's married to, but we know that he's married! Ennis has been, in the past, he's been known to really prioritize his private life, which, you know what? Respect. Like, you want to keep as much private as you can. There are plenty of comic artists and writers nowadays who give us way more information than needed when it came to their life. Alright, awards, nominations, bibliography, Yeah, he's did a lot of stuff. So I think, let's see, do we have anything more to go through? Okay, so I think that's pretty much as we're going to get from the Wikipedia page. So we're going to just go over to an interview video. Let's do that one. Let's do this sci-fi video here. A lot of the Garth Ennis interviews are like an hour long or an hour and a half long, which we're not doing that. So 17 minutes, and there's this clip too that I showed you guys. I'll link it down below, but I'm pretty sure this is a segment from the larger one for the larger sci-fi video, so we'll just start with the larger sci-fi video, and I'll link both down below for you.
I can't imagine how many trade paperback sales of Preacher there have been, but I know they're enough to say, if the character wants to f*** a chicken, he can f*** a chicken.
Better let him f*** a chicken.
Oh yeah, one of the villains in Preacher does in fact fuck a chicken.
I want to talk about Marvel Knights first because we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of that imprint, which really shook things up in Marvel. And back when you were brought on to do the Punisher, you actually had to wait a year.
That's right. That was why you got the sort of Ghostbuster Punisher.
Oh yeah, that time when Frank Castle was fighting demons and whatnot with his angel guns. Yeah, that was stupid.
That went first. So
Guardian Angel Punisher?
That's the one. Which, as I recall, sold pretty well anyway. I think because people just wanted the Punisher. So it was maybe a nice way to test the waters. And of course, when Stephen, my book, came out, people went crazy for it because it was the Punisher they wanted. And I think the character had sort of slipped off the radar for a year or two anyway.
This isn't really shopping.
Wow, the quality's amazing.
I mean, discovering more of what we love for less just feels like something else, right?
That's a yes.
This isn't shopping. This is beyond shopping. This is finding.
Yeah, he went through that explosion
YouTube, you better fucking pay me for that ad.
in the late 80s, early 90s.
Right.
Where he had like 3 books, and then as the industry imploded, so did the character.
Yeah.
You and Steve come on board, and what I loved about that run was that you didn't even try to justify his behavior.
No.
Because Frank Castle is, let's face it, a homicidal maniac. And your series didn't tiptoe around it, kind of embraced that.
Yeah, it did. At that point, in the end of the 90s, I didn't see any particular reason to treat the concept, the character, with any real degree of seriousness. I mean,
Yeah, I guess that's the best way to approach it. This was before 9/11, so, and this was after that goofy Guardian Angel Frank Castle, so it's like, why should we take this character seriously?
it was a simpler time. The world had yet to take that turn into the dark it took early in this century. And at the end of the last, it was easy to write a book about a violent character and simply treat it as a ridiculous, ludicrous concept that could almost be played for laughs, and which we frequently did.
Although I don't regard the Marvel Knights Punisher as being really as good as the Max Punisher work that I did as being as worthwhile, I have realized how
I disagree. Like, there is value to Punisher Max, or the Marvel Knights version.
important it was to me and my career. A lot of people talk about Preacher, but it barely sold half what that Punisher run did. And all of a sudden, I realized what this did for me was it got my work in front of a mainstream Marvel audience who might never go anywhere near something like Preacher.
You and Steve spent years on Preacher, then you're working on Punisher. How did you and Steve work together on it?
We worked together very, very simply. We almost never talked about work. There was almost no creative interaction. I know that sounds odd, people are surprised, but each of us simply trusted the other to get on with the job. I would supply him with scripts that kept it.
I don't think me and Martin are at that point yet. I don't know if I'm ever going to get that point with an artist. That's mostly because I am such a perfectionist when it comes to my writing, so yeah.
I'm entertained that I wouldn't ask him for the impossible, and he would give me good artwork that told the story exactly the way I wanted it, and that's all it took. In the 25 years I knew him, we almost never talked about what we were doing at that particular time. We talked about anything else but.
That's fascinating.
Sometimes he would ask me, just out of interest, what was coming up, what would happen to this character. But it wasn't because he was preparing himself to draw it. He was just interested. As he always said, give me a good story. And that was why he was interested. He wanted to know if the story would continue the way it was going. Would it be good? Would it give him what he wanted? There was never any, can you redraw this? There was never any, you'll need to rewrite this sequence because I can't. That never happened. It was really just a kind of what we call telepathy and trust. Once we met, became friends, and kind of clicked creatively, I don't think there was any need for any interaction after that. It's one of the reasons I was enormously fortunate to know him and work with him.
There's only a few teams, creative teams, that really become locked at the hip. In the modern comics era, your name and Steve Dillon's are right there. Is that just one of those once-in-a-lifetime situations where you find the right artist who's not only the perfect artist to complement your writing, but also somebody that you're friends with that makes the whole process easier?
I think you might say that myself and Steve would perhaps be the purest expression of that, of what you're talking about. But there are others. John McCrae on Hitman, for instance, he and I were good friends, still are, right throughout our time working together. I would say it was a relationship not unlike that I enjoyed, the one that I enjoyed with Steve. Other people that come to mind would be Russ Braun, Jason Burrows, Carlos Esquera. In none of these cases was it what was that expression I'm talking about perhaps as pure as what Steve and I enjoyed creatively, but it's definitely along the same lines.
Is it true that he can pencil 5 pages in a day?
Oh, he could do more than that.
Oh, that. That's a big one. That's a big feat there.
But the interesting thing about the Punisher...
Could Jimmy Palmiotti keep up as the inker?
Jimmy could keep up with him, really. He's one of the few who could. But Steve pointed out to me that, in a way, penciling for an inker slowed him down, because when you saw his pencils for his own inks, they were basically stick figures. He did all the work in the inks. If he had the pencil for another inker, he was doing all the work that normally he would do in the ink, so no time was saved. Not really.
You are an avowed non-superhero fan.
That's
so what
right.
comics were you reading as a kid?
Well, I lived in a small town outside Belfast in Northern Ireland, and the distribution was such that all we got were the mainstream British titles. We didn't even get the British reprints of the Marvel books. We certainly didn't get the original Marvel and DC books, which would show up in British stores occasionally. I'm talking here in the days before comic shops, of course. I'm talking about corner stores.
Pharmacies,
exactly.
things like that.
So I had almost no experience of American comics at all. And when I did see them, they didn't compare favorably with what I was reading. 2000 AD.
Oh, shit. Alright, let's mute this and see let the ad go through. But Ennis is a very interesting example of, yes, he was into comic books, but he was into a very different genre of comic books. So when he finally got into superheroes, he had a very different interpretation to them. Which I find fascinating, because even though he was not a huge fan of superheroes, he still managed to make some decent enough superhero comic books, even though with like his work with the boys, he was very critical of them.
Action, another one, a war comic called Battle. These were British weekly anthologies. They featured a lot of very straightforward, bare-bones storytelling. Judge Dredd is, of course, the best example. A character who was conceived as a future cop.
Wait, that's what Judge Dredd looked like before? Oh, I'm so glad they redesigned that helmet, because that does look very silly.
Who would shoot people for dropping litter if it came to it. When I saw, and I did occasionally see things like Batman and Spider-Man, I just didn't see the point of them at all. Next to something like Judge Dredd, I think
that also, if you like with Batman, he's basically a pulp character who eventually transformed into a superhero, and Spider-Man was very much a superhero to begin with. So if you're not entrenched in the culture of having those old pulp heroes and old superheroes, that's just basically been woven into your storytelling since you were a child, yeah, they probably would look very silly and you wouldn't be able to get the point of them.
What I think of is a kind of Stan Lee storytelling where a fight will go on over several pages, coming off more like a dance than anything else, in which these characters will exchange reams of dialogue. They'll cover the page in dialogue while hitting each other. And in comparison to what I was reading, that just didn't work for me. And so when I moved into writing comics myself, I had no superhero tradition, no affection for superheroes to bring with me. And I think you do have to encounter them and like them as a kid for them to work for you as an adult.
Sure.
Yeah, shit, that's exactly what I was saying.
To understand the good things about the characters and also the flaws to try to improve them, right?
Kids' affection.
You're very atypical in the comic book field. You obviously know that.
Yeah, I feel like I was lucky. I feel like I dodged a bullet in a way there, because if I hadn't, I'd have nothing original to say. There'd be nothing there'd be no point of view I could claim as purely my own.
I mean, I would disagree. I've been on this before, but I was into comics a little bit as a kid, but then I graduated to manga. And thank God my old fanfiction account is gone, but my old fanfiction account, I was very clearly inspired by manga, and I was doing all the manga tropes, all the manga things, all the manga characters, but I still was able to create my own original things, because even though I had that media to compare to, I also had my real life experience, and just watching the real world develop around me. Like, Next Evolution is based off of a medical travesty that happened back in the 60s, and I only know about that because of news reports, and it's been covered in my college classes. So I don't think that if you grow up with superheroes, you won't have an original thought in your head, because for most people's lives, it's not just the media you grow up with. Now, if you are one of those people who are like those super fanboys who only live through comic books, then yeah, you're probably not going to be as original. But when it comes to actual creatives, even if you grew up with those things, you're still able to create original thoughts. So it's like, I see what he's saying here, but I also disagree.
I can remember one publisher saying to me that his problem was that every time he gave Superman to a writer, that writer became the 5-year-old, eventually became the 5-year-old he was when he first encountered Superman, full of awe and wonder at the character. And he wanted me to write it because he thought that with that being lacking, I would do something a lot more hard-edged. He was wrong about that, actually. But I think that nice...
No matter how hard-boiled you may be, everyone turns to a 5-year-old when it comes to Superman. Oh, that sounded way creepier now that I'm listening to that, but... I mean, it's kind of hard not to. He's Superman! He's Superman! He flies through the air, he punches the bad guys, he can lift up buildings, he's Superman! I think it would be very difficult to not turn into a 5-year-old with Superman.
Communicates the idea. If you don't have that childhood affection for these characters, they'll mean nothing to you. You encounter them as an adult, which I did sort of in my late teens, and you'll come at them from a completely different angle. They'll mean either nothing, or all you'll be able to do is see the funny side, the ridiculous side.
Hellblazer was your introduction to American comic.
Right now at the Home Depot, shop Memorial Day savings on Whirlpool appliances.
No, YouTube, you're not getting any money from me. So because I'm not getting any money from you, so fuck you. Doo-doo.
And you followed the toughest
Looks like
act.
a crap ton of ads for this video, damn.
To follow in comics, Alan Moore.
I didn't exactly follow Alan. I followed Alan via Jamie Delano, who,
Right.
while Alan created the character in Swamp Thing, Jamie did the first 40 issues of Hellblazer, which was Constantine in his own book. I followed Jamie, and I thought Jamie set the tone very nicely for the character because he took Constantine out of a superhero universe and put him in a much darker, more hard-edged world.
And you ran with that and took him in your direction.
I did. I realized or understood that that was where Constantine belonged. To me, he doesn't work in a superhero world, or if he does...
Not according to DC, who in the animated universe was constantly trying to find reasons to fit Constantine into the narrative, which I will agree with Ennis on this. Constantine does not belong with superheroes. Yes, he was introduced in a superhero comic, but at the most, it's like he should maybe appear once in a while. Kind of like how, crap. I'm blanking on their, Zatanna. Like, Zatanna is more or less a superhero, but she kind of exists in her own, like, little... Well, no, she is in the Justice League. Damn it, why am I not blanking on... I'm sorry, guys. But, okay. Original point. Yeah, Constantine is a very dark character and very into dark magic. So, he doesn't really belong in the bright tights of superheroes. And I saw this post on X where it was like, what are your DC couples that you hate the most? And I said it was the whole Raven and Robin pairing, mostly because I grew up with like the Teen Titans TV show. So for me, it was more Robin and Starfire, and then Raven and Beast Boy. Even though Beast Boy and Raven were not really a couple in that show, they just seemed to have more of a, they gelled more together. But another couple that was mentioned on that post was Zatanna and Constantine, and that's when Mike's Total Dragon's like, yeah, I do not like this couple because I really don't like Constantine. It's like, yeah, that's fair, because he is a very morally great character who probably should not be interlooped so closely with bright, happy superheroes.
Only on the edge of it. Clearly DC disagree.
There's still a great amount of affection and reverence for your time on the character, so clearly a lot of fans agree with your take on it. From there, you then went to the big break, right. Preacher. Tell me about pitching Preacher to Karen Berger.
It was really done to Stuart Moore, who was the editor of Hellblazer at the time and who had worked on the book with myself and Steve.
So you pitched it to Stuart first?
Yeah, DC, through Stuart, essentially said, we love what you did on Hellblazer, we'll take whatever you two want to do next. And Preacher was what I came up with. It did not spring fully formed. I can tell you that. It was a series of ideas, one slowly building upon the next, something of a jumble.
I get that, because that, for the longest time, that's what Next Evolution was to me. And I think that when you're trying to come up with a series for a lot of writers, your series rarely is fully formed once you start writing. And it's once you start getting into the writing and when you start getting into the narratives and the characters where it's like, okay, now I have a better idea of where everything's going to go. So yeah, I get that.
Where I proceeded.
Oh. The cats are getting fed. There we go. Yeah, they've been waiting by the feeder for the last hour.
Largely on instinct, slowly understanding that I was onto something here, that the southern-western feel that the thing had was the way to go. The kind of American Gothic feel. Working my way through stories, thinking, shall we put the kid in the coffin? Shall we put the little kid in the coffin? Let's put the little kid in the coffin and say, that's weird, I haven't heard of anyone doing that before. Let's see what happens with that.
Maybe it's because I'm a true crime girly, but I have heard way worse than putting the kid in the coffin when it comes to true crime. I've seen a lot of shit.
And the more I did, the more it seemed to work. So it wasn't really as organic a book in its development as some of the things I would do later, like The Boys, like Hitman, like my runs on The Punisher, which I think perhaps are a little bit more accessible. Preacher is perhaps accessible for people in a different way, where if you've got the right sensibility, the right sense of humor, you'll see all this stuff being flung at you, and you'll perhaps be a little overwhelmed at first, but you'll understand on some basic level. Yeah, I'll go with it.
Can you pinpoint?
Okay, so the first time I was introduced to Preacher, I was in the little hippy dippy comic book shop with a former friend of mine, and we saw the graphic novels of Preacher on the shelf. And the former friend was like, hey, have you read Preacher? And I said, no. And he's like, oh my god, you gotta read Preacher. And I'm like, maybe another day. And he's like, look, no, dude, I will buy you the first novel of Preacher so you can read it. And I'm like, all right, fine, I'll fucking read Preacher. And from what I've stopped at, I think, volume 3 or 4. I have not completed the series myself. But from what I've read, it is a pretty good series. I mean, obviously, if you're very religious and you're just not about all of that blasphemy and sacrilege, I get it. It is very, very, very critical of religion, and very specifically Christianity. So if you're not all about that, I get it. If you don't want to be subjected to that, don't read Preacher. Funny enough, the former friend who recommended to me, Catholic, and he at least pretended to be a devout Catholic. He always did the whole praying before meal thing and went to church and all that, but a lot of his other opinions and a lot of his other things he did made me question if he was like a truly dedicated Catholic. I'm not trying to do the whole religion gatekeeping thing because I myself am not a Catholic yet, but it just seemed very contradictory, and as my father put it, like around the friend breakup, he came across as the type of Catholic who really, 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 really wanted you to know he was Catholic, because he really, 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 really didn't want people to think he wasn't Catholic, which is very odd. It was a very odd time in my life.
When you felt, okay, now I've got a handle on the story that I want to tell for the remainder of the time on Preacher?
Would have been towards the end of the second year, when I was writing sort of 2021, 22, realizing, oh, I know where it goes. I know how it finishes. I know how to tie this together. There was still a lot of blank space in between that I could fill in, but that was around the point where I started to see, yes, I know what happens with the Saint of Killers. I know how Jesse and Cassidy resolve all this.
Okay, low-key, the Saint of Killers was probably one of the coolest inventions of his. Like, the moment the Saint of Killers came into the story, it was like, oh, crap, this guy is basically like a spiritual atom bomb. I did really like the Saint of Killers when I was reading his storyline, and he does have a very tragic backstory from what I understand, but I haven't gotten to that point in the book. But I really did like the Saint of Killers from what I've read from Preacher.
I see it. It was really just, once again, accepting that I was writing a Western.
Vertigo was created to give creators like yourself free reign, right, to do. Did you get pushback for characters like DC or R-Space?
No, not as
Come on, you didn't get pushback on that?
Where we go.
Okay, I am seriously doubting that. He's probably not going to disclose it, but I seriously doubt he received no backlash.
That pushback was more for specific incidents. Arseface did not cause a problem at the time. That was strange. It would be more a line of dialogue. It would be more a specific scene.
Oh god, the meat locker. I did not get to this point in Preacher, but my curiosity piqued, and it's like, okay, I may not finish this series, but I at least need to know what the fuck is up about the meat locker. And when I saw it, it's like, oh god, why? Why? That is, ugh.
I can recall being told years later that the publisher did not actually look at Preacher for the first 2 years.
What? What? One of the most controversial series that you're going to publish and you don't even fucking look at it? What?
The impression I got was he hadn't bothered until he heard that one of Karen's funny little books was making a bit of an impact, so should check it out. So he got the first 2 trades and started reading them. And I'm told that someone wandered into his office the next day and noticed there was a hole in the ceiling and said, "What gives?" And he said, "I've never done that before. I threw a book at the ceiling." Now, I don't know what scene it was. It's the second book, so you can guess. But that was probably how we got away with so much in those first couple of years, because no one senior enough was looking and taking offense. That would not always be the case, but that might have helped us. That might have been what got us through the first.
Okay, that does explain a lot. Because like I said, Preacher is very critical of religion, and most comic publishers, especially back then, would have absolutely shied away from something like that. So you know what? It does actually make sense that nobody was actually paying attention, except Karen Berger. Nobody was paying attention to what this silly little Irishman was coming up with until it was starting to become a thing, and then they just finally oh, let's see what's going on. Oh my god! How do you not even hear the pitch? How did nobody direct this guy hey, this comic is super critical of religion. Maybe we should look into this. Make sure we're not going to ruffle too many feathers. But it's how do you even do that?
Difficult 2 years, and at that point, of course, the publisher has to look at it and go, well, I hate this with every fiber of my being, but look at this big stack of cash it's earned. So
Because by then, Preacher was, like Sandman, becoming a very popular trade paperback seller.
Right, exactly.
Which is something that Vertigo really introduced into the industry.
That's right.
And I can't imagine how many trade paperback sales of Preacher there have been. But I know they're enough to say, the character wants to f*** a chicken, he can f*** a chicken.
Better let him f*** a chicken.
And that is from Paul Levitz himself. He said that. He said the one question.
Did he actually use those words?
Oh, he told me this verbatim. He goes, the one question I did ask Karen was in a meeting, and he did kind of say the same thing, that he purposely did not read the Vertigo books to give you guys space. But he says, Karen, does he really have to f*** a chicken?
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe that's knocked my respect for Paul up a notch. Yeah.
Faith is a...
Fuck you,
Easy.
YouTube. You're not getting any money out of me. I'm not getting any money out of you. So let's call this even. Wait, was that George Clooney?
A great many of your books. Even in The Punisher, you see it. As someone who's an avowed atheist, why is that such an important theme for you to explore?
I suppose it comes from my fascination with religion and its effect on the world as a largely negative force. I grew up in a country that it was really cut in half by a religious division. Looking at the history of what Christianity in particular has done to the Western world over the centuries, it's a fascination. There's a degree of disgust there. It's something that's never going to go away from my work, I think, because these ideas seem to be so strong and they exert such an influence over so many. And on another level, you get some great toys to play with. You get demons and angels.
That's the little boy in him being like, yeah, I don't understand all this religion thing, but the toys are cool.
And you get blasphemy. You get a lot of great special effects, a lot of great characters and background material, things that can liven up any story.
Send it on this. If Garth Ennis is still reading comics, give me 3 comics that he's reading now.
I'm reading Saga.
Alright.
I shouldn't be, because it's about elves in space, but it's Brian K. Vaughan, so it's just...
I'll lighten the fuck up and read your space elf comic.
So good. Anything Alan Moore does. I thought Providence was quite incredible. I've never seen anyone...
I tried to read the first volume of Providence, but I just could not get into it. I'm sorry, I know it's exploring the Lovecraftian world, but I just could not get into it.
Managed to think beyond human in the way that Alan did when he was writing that book, think beyond and outside human morality in quite a scary way, quite a disturbing way. But given that the world of H.P. Lovecraft revolves around entities that regard human beings as bugs, if they regard them at all, I think that's more than appropriate, and he really caught that. And beyond that, hell, you've got me. That's it for the moment.
Those two, I'm shocked that Saga's on the list.
It shouldn't be, but he's so good. I mean, it's Brian Vaughan.
Out of curiosity, you guys, which comic book writer, no matter how edgy or how, like, uber masculine he would be, which one do you think is reading the My Little Pony comics? I don't know why, but I get the feeling that Garth Ennis is probably not listing the third one because it's probably something he would not be caught dead reading in public. Not in like a pornographic way, but more in just my pride as the writer of The Boys and Preacher and The Punisher refuses to allow me to disclose that I am in fact reading this comic book. So it does make me wonder, is the last entry My Little Pony? Is that what it is? But it probably isn't. I seriously doubt it is, but I don't know. What do you guys think that third option was? I'm gonna grab a LaCroix and a beer real quick. I'll be right back. Then again, how old is this interview? Okay, this was 6 years ago, so. Alright, so I did have 2 articles, like the 10 best Garth Ennis comics of all time, though we've probably been over them during the Wikipedia page, but I'll still include this in the link below. And we also have this interview from CBR. This was, late last year. I don't really want to put them through any more shit. Garth Ennis on returning to The Boys and the New Image imprint. The only reason I don't want to include these was because... Well, let's see how long this is. Oh, okay, this isn't that long. I guess we will cover this real quick. Okay, so CBR. I don't really want to put them through any more shit. Garth Ennis on returning to The Boys and New Image imprint. Garth Ennis is far from a stranger to comics. The writer helped craft The Boys and Preacher, 2 independent comic titles that have become wildly successful television shows. On top of that, the writer wrote an extensive run on The Punisher for Marvel, prominent enough his names become synonymous with Frank Castle. Now, the living comics legend is turning his eyes back to creator-owned materials, having launched his own imprint at Image Comics, titled Ninth Circle. Ennis and company will focus on pumping out horror titles. Oh, horror titles. For the indie comics powerhouse. We recently caught up with Ennis through email to chat Freddy the Fix, his first release through Ninth Circle. Alright. Through your career, you've effectively gotten to write whomever you've wanted. Most would consider you the definitive writer for The Punisher, and you've had breakout hits like The Boys and Preacher. What makes Ninth Circle the best thing for you at this point in your career? Ennis. It just happens to come along. I entertain offers from pretty much anyone. It always comes down to getting the most, ideally total, creative freedom under the best possible deal. Ninth Circle is a horror imprint, and I usually have a couple of horror stories bubbling away at the back of my brain. What came first, Freddy the Fix or the concept of your own imprint at Image? Freddy, I like to think about... The article is kind of edited a little weirdly. I like to think about stories first and foremost. I tend to leave the publishing details to others. For what it's worth, when the notion of a horror imprint was first mooted, I wanted to call it Nostromo, for what should be obvious reasons. Sadly, it was not to be. Life is so imperfect. At what point did Mike Perkins come into the mix? It only takes a quick glance to realize he's the perfect artist for this concept. Mike and I have wanted to work together for some time. We have known each other for 20 years at this point. Up to now, I have gotten from him is a cover for my Johnny Red series. The Hurricane, reprinted in a swanky new edition by Rebellion early in 25. That has to be an edit. So this is long overdue. It's all happened quite fast, actually. I think I mentioned it to him in January. We met in a shitty London pub to talk about it a month or so later. And now here we are. Okay. Freddy Fix It. What's next for you at Ninth Circle? Freddy's an oversized one-shot. Do you plan to mainly self-contained graphic novella-sized stories, or can readers expect some ongoings from you? In the era of the MCU, and perhaps more appropriately Amazon's growing The Boys universe, have you thought of an interconnected world under the Ninth Circle label? It's very early days right now, probably too early to be talking about shared universi, but I'd certainly like to do more with Freddy. He's a very easy and rewarding character to write. Got just the right attitude for the world he inhabits, I think. Speaking of The Boys, any interest in pursuing more stories in that world? Not right now. I've always enjoyed writing Butcher and his wife Becky, but I don't really want to put them through any more shit. Oh yeah, they have been through a lot of shit in the comics. An alternate universe story where they avoid the god-awful things that happen to them and live happily ever after would be highly enjoyable for me to write, but I suspect might not satisfy the audience, or indeed the publisher. Freddy the Fix hits the shelves at your local comic shops December 18th. You know, Ennis has, like, from what I'm seeing, it looks like Ennis does want to publish, you know, not so much cutesy things, but, you know, more wholesome things. It does seem like nowadays in his career he wants to publish more wholesome things. So maybe he should consider a pen name, because the name Garth Ennis, it's like, you know what you're expecting from Garth Ennis. You are expecting religious satire, you're expecting gore, you're expecting dick jokes, you're expecting a lot of stuff from Garth Ennis, so it makes me wonder, has he ever considered a pen name where he could just make up a whole persona to make all of these wholesome comics? Like, just plain wholesome. It could just be a regular-ass Pulp Fiction story where there's a wholesome ending at the end, or maybe even he clearly wanted to get into writing children's books, so why not create a pen name for it? I don't know, just a thought. But anyway, so this video here, it's split into 3. Yeah, there's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. So let's see how far we can get into this one. It's by Previews World. So let's see what we can do with this guy.
In America, right? Like, we're big on the superheroes, right? But that's not the case in pretty much everywhere else. So you're not big on capes. So I was actually very curious, what kind of comics did you grow up on?
Well, I've been thinking about this a bit recently myself, just because, with 30 years, haven't hit the 30-year mark this year.
In your career?
Yeah. And I figured out that the reason is, when I was a kid, where I grew up, small town outside Belfast, the distribution of comics wasn't really as extensive as it might have been in Belfast itself.
Right.
So whereas my longtime collaborator John McCrae, living in Belfast, is able to amass a pretty decent collection of American comics or their British reprints, I never saw them. All I saw were the British newsstand titles. The American comics that I did see were few and far between, and I just didn't see enough of them to develop much of an interest. People might have heard of 2000 AD, most obviously Judge Dredd.
Oh, yeah.
That's the comic I grew up on, but I also read a great deal of war material. There was a weekly anthology like 2000 AD called Battle, and it followed the same format, 6 or 7 4-page stories, black and white artwork, weekly. There were things called the picture libraries, war picture library, battle picture library, just one-shot, one-off stories, 4 of them published a month. And you could find these on any British newsstand.
Right, yeah, so they're readily available.
They were the ones I found. So were it not for this quirk of fate, I'd be like anybody else. I'd have the same interest in American comics and superhero comics that everyone else does, because it's kind of like religion. If you get it that young, you're never going to get rid of it. Once.
Disagree. Heavily disagree. Okay, when was this interview done? So this was 5 years ago. I don't know. It's just because I'm in the indie sphere, and I've noticed that a lot of the indie writers, they had a love for the original comics. They aren't so abhorrent to it where they can't criticize it, or they are just blindly following along to the superhero lockstep storytelling. If anything, many comic book fans, at least in America, are super critical of the big two, especially now. So I would disagree on that point.
The hooks in. You can't really, I would contend you can't really come to material like that as an adult and develop that same affection for it that you would as a kid.
Again, I would disagree, because there have been at least some film directors where it's like they were asked, or even Ryan Reynolds, say what you want about Ryan Reynolds, but once it was told to him after the Blade movies, because he was in Blade, I believe, that, oh, your character is just like Deadpool. Like, you act so similar to Deadpool, and him being like, who the hell is Deadpool? Goes to look into the comics, and he's like, oh my god, I love these comics now. I want to be Deadpool now. And he kind of sort of got his wish at the time in that god-awful Wolverine movie. But then he just loved the character so much that he bullied Fox into getting the Deadpool movie made. They say that, the test footage, it was just accidentally released by chance. And I'm thinking to myself, I bet it probably was released by a person named Schmeyen Schmenolds. So I would disagree on that too, because there is something very endearing to superheroes. Even I'm into the indie sphere, and I'm not like uber into superheroes, but even now and again I'll pop open a superhero comic, and I can't help but be entertained. My favorite among which is the Batman and Captain America one-shot by John Byrne. I can't help but be charmed by it. I'm sorry, I have such a soft spot for that comic. It's just so enduring. It's so enduring. It's so just, we don't care that this isn't real. We don't care that this is too fantastical. We just want to write a comic book where Batman and Captain America team up to take down the Joker and the Red Skull. And honestly, it's so endearing in its own way.
But that's why I ended up liking what I like and writing what I write.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
How did you break in?
I was reading a comic called Crisis, and Crisis was a short-lived kind of sister publication to 2000 AD, and it was a political comic. And their signing tour came to Belfast in actually October of '88, and I got talking to the editor, Steve McManus, and I asked him, political comic, would you be interested in a story about the Northern Ireland Troubles by someone who lives in Northern Ireland? And he said that's exactly what we'd be looking for. So I sent off some ideas, didn't think any more of it, and then the following January on my birthday, my 19th birthday, I thought, why not, eh? And I called them up and mentioned the story, and I was expecting, yeah, we'll get back to you. But in fact, the guy said, oh yeah, we wanted to talk to you about that. And that was it.
Okay, nice.
Off to the races.
Awesome. Those characters in Crisis, those are the same characters that popped up in Dix like years later, right?
Yeah, the two characters in Dix were sort of supporting characters in the first story, Troubled Souls, which is a much more straight-laced, heavily political story.
I mean, when it came to the Troubles, religion and politics was very much intertwined.
Dix grew out of a desire, I think, to show that I had more than one string to my bow, that I wasn't just the serious, sincere political writer, but that I could do other kinds of material as well. Dix went about as far in that direction as was humanly possible, I would say.
There were religious aspects to Crisis when you were writing.
Have you been paying attention, dude?
Crisis.
Yes.
Like, did you get any flack even then? Because I know, of course, we know about Preacher and something that pushed back about that. But did you get flack back then for that?
Yeah, there was a story I did. The follow-up to Troubled Souls was called True Faith, and it's a sort of religious black comedy about a madman who starts burning down churches to try and provoke a confrontation with God. It turns out God isn't interested, but that when it was collected.
Or God is seeing your bullshit, and he's like, I'll let you cook yourself. I guess when it comes to faith with me, like, God had created everything, and he does try to, like, push us in the direction he wants us to go in, but for the most part, he's like, you know what? If you want to listen to me, I'm absolutely ready to give you my message. If you don't want to listen to me and you want to continuously defy me, then sure, fine. You're just not going to get a seat in heaven. That's another controversial take, and I know. But it's like, if you want to continuously be a jackass, fine, continue to be a jackass. You're not gonna see the light of heaven either way. And even if you honestly here's the thing that I just don't get about atheism, and I'm saying this as a former atheist. The thing that I don't get about atheism is that this whole do whatever you want, it doesn't matter, you're not going to heaven or hell, you're just gonna die and just cease to exist, that's just how it's going to be. And it's like, okay, by that logic, why do bad things then? Why do bad things? Why would you intentionally go out of your way to be evil if it doesn't even matter? Like, as far as, like, with coming to good things, I can understand that, because it's like, you know, you see a lady at the grocery store and she's, like, short a couple dollars on her grocery bill, and you just give the cashier the couple dollars needed so that her grocery bill can be covered. It's like, that's a good deed. You just do it because it's the right thing to do. Well, what I don't understand is, if you truly believe that God doesn't exist and it's just like whatever, then why go out of your way to do shitty things? If you truly believe that human morality is outside of God and humans are good outside of God, then why would you willingly choose to do evil things? Like, you don't need a religion to understand that stabbing a man for no good reason is bad. Like, if the dude was trying to kill you first and you stab him, that's one thing, but I think we can all agree that stabbing a man is bad, but there are some people who choose to willingly do that even though they know that God doesn't exist. And it doesn't make sense to me. Like, if you truly believe that, oh, if we just get rid of religion, then people will just be fine. We don't need religion. Like, people will do good things in and of themselves. But that does bring the question of, then why do bad things? Like, why willingly choose to do bad things? I don't know. I don't know.
As a trade paperback, the guy doing publicity for the company sent copies of the book to every major religious organization and church in the country, and it was withdrawn from sale by the publisher within a couple of weeks. So yeah, that's one promotional tactic that I don't think was tried again.
Okay, so there's like, not for everything, but there's a theme like with religion in a lot of your books. Is that because of your upbringing? Like, where's that fascination with that particular type of story come from?
I think it's I think my sort of general disdain for organized religion comes from growing up in a place, in a province where people are fighting a religious war, which, if you're an atheist, makes no sense at all, because it's people fighting over how they worship their imaginary friend, and they're killing each other over this. You know, this is ultimately miserable business. Now, I was not directly involved in the Troubles. I grew up kind of on the edge of it.
And that's why I'm not trying to... I know I sound harsh in this stream, but I'm not judging him too hard, because I understand why he's in the mental state that he's in when it comes to religion. Like, you're growing up where people are just blowing each other up over which denomination of Christianity are we going to align with. It does look very silly, and it does horrify you. Like, why are you guys literally killing each other over this? I can understand how, for a person, that would lead you to the conclusion of, this is fucking stupid. I get that. And I get why he is the way he is. So that's why I'm not super judgmental towards him.
But when you see that going on, when you hear the latest grim news of murder or brutality on the radio every morning, and you think, my God, there's no end to this, and they're doing it. They're doing it for the most spurious of reasons, and yet they will not stop. And I think it's that more than anything else that gave me my distrust of religion. I wasn't exactly raised atheist, because, I mean,
the Wikipedia article disagrees, but go on.
You don't really raise someone an atheist.
Right,
you just do nothing.
Defeats the purpose.
Right. So, you know, to me, when I first encountered religion, it was a strange thing when the teacher suddenly told us that there was a God who could see everything we did, who could see into our hearts, who was inside us and with us always, and would ultimately reward us or punish us for our...
Oh, this is where the Wikipedia article was quoting from. Okay, okie dokie.
For our deeds. I was absolutely bewildered by that. I thought that was incredibly strange, but I can remember being 6 and looking around the class at the other kids, and they were all just nodding. Yeah,
Right.
Makes sense, because of course they'd already been told this at home. So to them it made perfect sense.
Wow.
I was somewhat bewildered.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and like, it's giving you like fuel ever since then for
Well,
creative
yeah.
endeavors.
Yeah, I think I even got a bit into Preacher, where young Jesse Custer is introduced to the notion of God for the first time, and I think he says it's his horrible grandmother telling him it, and I think he says something like, it sounds kind of scary, and he's promptly slapped around the head for it.
Right.
Now, I never had anything like that happen. What happened to me was, in the schoolyard after we'd been told about this, I can remember people saying, do you love God? I love God. I certainly love God. Do you love God? And I was the only one who went, no. I think I hate him, meaning I'm terrified.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
And then I went home and asked my mother about it, and she said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, it sounds kind of stupid, meaning I'm terrified. And she said, well, there you are then.
Yeah, okay.
And that was it.
No, she was just so totally okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool.
I've had somewhat of a similar experience in bringing up to a point. Like, I myself was baptized Methodist, and my family went to church for Christmas and Easter because both sets of my grandparents were religious. So, and I think my parents just went along with that because they didn't want to upset their parents. But my dad is a very he is a very loudmouth atheist. He can and will make fun of you for your religious beliefs. Well, not exactly for religious beliefs, but he will just, like, give little jabs every now and again. But my mom, for the most part, she just seemed really disinterested in religion up until she got with my stepdad. And I was a preteen by the time my stepdad came into the picture. My stepdad was Catholic, and my mom was in the process of converting to Catholicism. And I still remember that one day. It was right after I had to be told that Santa Claus wasn't real. Yes, I was one of those idiot kids that deadass believed Santa Claus was real for way too long. But it was right after I got told Santa Claus wasn't real. And I went through the grieving process of, okay, Santa isn't real, flying reindeer aren't real, blah, 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 blah. And then my mom was getting really into Catholicism, and she started talking religion to me and getting really into, like, talking about Jesus and his miracles. And for me, as a kid who, I just assumed the biblical stories were just folk stories, like what my pop-up was telling me. They're just folk stories. And I'm just sitting here with her going on about religion in a way I had never seen her before, and I'm just like, wait, so you don't want me to believe in the man in the red suit with the flying reindeer who gives me presents every Christmas, but you do want me to believe in the guy who walks on water, turns water into wine, and just makes fish out of nowhere. For me as a kid, it didn't make sense. Obviously, I've gotten over that mentality now, but that's why I'm understanding of atheism, because I think a lot of atheists are created because people just explain religion to them very poorly, or they explain faith very poorly. And when they hear that explanation for the first time as a kid, they're like, what? That literally makes no sense. But now that I have read up more, and now that I have listened more, I'm starting to understand more about faith, and I don't know if I ever truly stopped believing in God, to be honest, but it's like, once I started learning more, that's when it's like, okay, now faith is making a little bit more sense to me. So, and I think Garth Ennis is probably in that same spot as a kid. That's why I'm relaying this story. I believe he was in that same spot. I'm not going to say we should proselytize to him, but I am saying I get where he's coming from, and I understand why he thinks the way he thinks. Anyway.
You transitioned to 2000 AD, of course, right? Like, were you a big Judge Dredd fan growing up?
Oh, huge.
Oh, yeah?
Huge. I mean, for me, that is actually a bit of a misstep. It turns out that I'm not very good at writing Judge Dredd. I mean, I was very grateful for the opportunity at the time, but I think I was too much of a fan and too in awe of what had come before.
Okay.
And I just didn't have that perspective that allows you to step back and really examine the thing and find your own way into the character.
Right.
I could not do that with Dredd, and I did a couple of years worth of Dredd stories and really didn't do very good work. But I mean, at the time, of course.
Artists are always their own greatest critics.
Because that's with hindsight. At the time, I was delighted to be writing this character that I'd read as a kid.
Right, yeah. Was it intimidating? Because you came in after John Wagner.
Yeah,
and I mean, John
that's
Wagner's
right.
been doing it forever, really. But
that's right.
At the same time, was that a little intimidating?
I don't recall being intimidated. I recall more of a sense of just diving in with both feet
Yeah.
and loving what I was doing, you know, but again, without the perspective to judge what I'm doing. Now contrast that, on the other hand, with my work on The Punisher, where I never read The Punisher as a kid. But while I might not be interested in the minutiae of his previous adventures, there is enough about the character that puts me in mind of characters I've enjoyed in comics, on TV, and in film, that I'm able to find my way into the character. I'm able to find my way into writing Frank Castle.
Right, yeah.
I just didn't have that with Dredd.
Right. But I mean, it kind of provides a fresh perspective too, I imagine. Like, and I think that's what people have responded to with your run on Punisher.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I've often joked that I think Frank is a British comic book character born on the wrong side of the Atlantic by mistake.
No, Frank was born on the right side. I think a lot of Brits don't appreciate the fact that quite a few Americans do agree with a similar British sentiment. Maybe not now, but at least back in the 90s. Like, there were quite a few Americans, especially Vietnam veterans, who are very much of the European mindset of, like, fuck this society where we have to pretend everything's okay. Fuck this whole thing where the justice system is always right and everything is always okay. It's bright and sunshine and whatever. So no, Frank is absolutely not a British character born on the wrong side of the pond. He belongs here and he fits here. He just fits a very specific section of American culture, which is accentuated by the fact that quite a few military folks and police folks they love the Punisher. They empathize so much with the Punisher's plight because so many of them have been in situations where it's like, I would so want to put a bullet in your head right now. I just want to kill you right now. It's not in a sociopathic or fascist way, but it's like when you see some of the stuff that the police have to deal with on a regular basis and see some of the stuff that the military has to deal with on a regular basis, the Punisher doesn't seem that crazy in that context. Like, the Punisher... I watch a lot of police body cam footage. There are some of them where it's like, I wish I could just reach my hand in the screen and strangle the person who's being interviewed, because it's like, how are you this much of a pathetic little shit? So, no, the Punisher belongs here.
Mistake, because he is so unlike the other Marvel or DC mainstream characters.
Yeah.
One, he kills people. Two, he's just an ordinary guy. You know, he has no superpowers. Whereas, on the other hand, a character like Frank Castle would have fit into some of the comics I read as a kid, like 2000 AD or a similar title called Action. Someone like Frank would have fit into those comics quite well. Very much inspired by the this sort of early 70s vigilante cop notion that you see in things like Dirty Harry. Exactly. And the British comics of the era were much more heavily influenced by film and TV than they were other comics.
Right, yeah. Right, that makes sense. So how did you transition into U.S. comics?
The first story that I did, Troubled Souls, was collected as a 100-page trade paperback, and that...
Out of complete curiosity, because I'm thinking some of you are thinking the same way. Alright, let's take a look. Oh boy. Two. Okay, we got one for 21. That's reasonable. Oh boy. So, okay, you can find it on eBay for a reasonable price.
With full color artwork by John McCrae was a very nice portfolio of my work. And it was great. It was a great thing to give to American publishers, and it was both Karen Berger and Archie Goodwin read it separately, and both commissioned me to do work. In Karen's case, of course, that was Hellblazer.
because Jamie Delano was coming to the end of his run, and they needed someone to step in.
And is that how you first encountered Steve Dillon? Like, had you known each other prior, or?
No, I met Steve in the summer of '89.
Oh, look at them. They're such beasties.
I didn't really hit it off with him until he moved to Dublin a few months later. And I was still in Belfast at the time, and the following summer, myself and a couple of other people came down, and we had a weekend on the beer with Steve, and he and I sat up very late one night.
Oh, that looks so clean. Oh, that illustration of the Punisher looks so clean.
See, it was well into the following morning, and I can remember we killed off a bottle of whiskey, and we just talked about
Damn. That's one hell of a weekend.
what we thought comics were for, what you could do with comics, what the form was capable of, and there was an almost audible click. I can remember that. That was one of those things where it's like, yes, you're the one.
Yeah.
It was his comic artist soulmate. Aww.
We did some work together, a couple of Judge Dreads, and he did a couple of fill-ins on Hellblazer, but it wasn't until he came on as regular artist on the book about halfway through my run that we really sort of meshed, and everything else followed from that.
Now, you mentioned John McCrae earlier. I actually didn't want to skip over that. Like, did editorial introduce you to him? Did you know him prior, or?
I knew John because he and a friend had opened Belfast's first comic shop in 1987. And so I would go there to get my comics, and I got talking to him there. And then when Troubled Souls was accepted, it was obvious that a Northern Ireland-based comic artist was going to have a massive advantage over anybody else.
Right, yeah.
This was pre-internet, so sending people a ton of reference material.
I mean, he is correct there. Like, the perspective of someone who's actually living in Northern Ireland, very close to Belfast, with a perspective on the Troubles, yeah, his viewpoint is valuable.
Just wasn't as easy as it had been, and at that point, John, I think, had already gotten work. He'd gotten a couple of short stories for Marvel UK. And the only other guy was Will Simpson, and he was up to his neck in Judge Dredd and other work for 2000 AD, so that basically meant it was John. I mean, I'm aware that now there is quite a big Irish comics scene, but in those days there really was not. And, you know, you could count the number of people working in comics on the fingers of one hand.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about Preacher. You definitely brought that up. First of all, where did that concept come from? Because, I mean, already it's like, for me, I got to be honest with you. Like, I came into comics because of superheroes. Left comics because of superheroes.
Right.
And then I just happened to stumble upon Preacher and The Authority at the same time. And it was kind of like, I didn't even know comics could do this.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, like, for me, it was sort of like a lightning rod. It was just sort of like, oh, comics can do anything.
Right, which
know?
has been the line I've been selling all along.
Yeah.
Really, comics can do anything.
They can do anything.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm just very
I
curious,
agree.
like, where did the concept for Preacher come from?
Well, it came in stages. DC had told us, because they were so pleased with how our Hellblazer work had done, that whatever Steve and I came up with next, they would take.
Okay.
And so I suppose towards the end of the Hellblazer run, I'm thinking about what that new project's going to be. And as I said, it came in stages, almost in fits and starts. I put it together instinctively. I wanted it to be an American story. I wanted it to have qualities of a Western.
That's not Steve Dillon art, but oh my god. The painted covers for Preacher were absolutely beautiful. Like, they're absolutely beautiful.
I wanted there to be horror in it, a lot of supernatural material. Let's get religion in there. I wanted an arch villain of such appalling, horrific evil that he would be unforgettable. I also wanted a proper Old West gunfighter as a walking embodiment of that time. I thought an Irish vampire would be good. And I wanted the lead female character to be
really a girl in a black cocktail dress with a giant pistol. And the lead guy, the notion of
He's a man who prefers his ladies to be well packed.
him being a preacher and the thing being called preacher, that came along a bit later on. So did the search for God, because I've got all these elements.
Yeah.
But what I don't have is the thread running through it that's going to bind it all together. You know,
Right.
what does the preacher do? Well, he searches for God.
Yeah.
So let's make that literal.
Right.
And then the first couple of years, I really was just proceeding on the instinct. It was like, well, this seems to work. Shall we do a bit more? What'll we do next? Shall we put the little boy in the coffin? Let's put him in the coffin. That seems to work. I was about 2 years into it before I figured out where it was going and how it was going to end. Yeah.
Okay. Like, was the when you made that transition? Oh, well, first of all, were you at all cushioned by like some of the, you know, the outrage, I guess, that was surrounding the book? Like, did it kind of like keep you away from it so you could just write your own thing? Like, did some of that infiltrate like your?
I did hear about it. You
Yeah.
know, again, this is. I was going to say it's pre-internet. It was right at the beginning of the
Yeah, it
internet
was,
in,
right.
in its current form. You
Right.
know. But I got the letters of complaint and praise.
Yeah.
I saw why people liked it, why they didn't like it. I will say that for any notion of Preacher being a controversial book, there was never really a massive shitstorm over it. It was more
Right up until it became popular. Then it became a shitstorm.
a case of a few individuals continuing to complain long past the point when everyone else had lost interest. The
Right.
sense I got really was, instead of there being a constant controversy, it was more a case of people looking at the book, deciding if they were going to read it or not, and if it wasn't for them, simply leaving it and moving
Right,
on,
yeah,
which
yeah.
I prefer,
Right.
actually.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's funny. I mean, it's like, because I think people forget that now with like social media, right? Like,
Right.
people don't realize it's like usually like a handful of people that are raising hell.
Right.
You know, and
Right.
everybody else is perfectly fine moving on, or
Yes.
just, hey, this is my cup of tea, I'll run with it.
Exactly. There is still that ability to say, this is not for me. However,
Right.
if you like it,
Yeah.
please continue.
Right. And I
Yeah.
think that's key.
That's the majority of comics I run across. Like, a lot of them, like, there's a good portion of them where it's like, I like this, I jive with this, and there's some of them where it's like, yeah, I don't like it. But the vast majority of comics I come across with, it's like, I acknowledge that some people will like this, but I do not like this. And that's just the pits.
Like,
Yeah.
not everything's going to be for everybody.
Yeah, but something enraged someone to the point that they kicked up a fuss, that it became an issue, that the next thing I knew, we were out the door.
Alright. So that's the end of that video. That's the first part of a 3-part series. But we're about out of time anyways. So I am going to go ahead and end this stream about now, because I have some vacation planning to get to. So, if you like this stream, go ahead and hit the like button, share, comment, whatever. And I'll see you all June 11th. I will see you all guys June 11th. Bye.